Everyone remembers the victories, the records, the Super Bowl, the roar of the crowd when Drew Brees stepped onto the field like everything was under control. But what if the greatest strength people admired was actually hiding the greatest struggle no one ever saw? Because behind the calm smile, behind the perfect passes, there was another story unfolding quietly. A story where success didn't erase fear, where winning didn't stop the pain, and where every season could have been the last, even when no one realized it. Drew Brees wasn't just fighting opponents. He was fighting time, doubt, and a body that was slowly breaking down while the world expected perfection every single week. And here's the part most fans never knew. The moment that almost ended everything didn't happen at the end of his career. It happened when he was just getting started, when doctors quietly questioned whether he would ever throw the same again. And from that moment forward, every touchdown came with a cost. Every victory hid another sacrifice. And the longer he stayed on top, the heavier that hidden life became. Because sometimes, the strongest people aren't the ones who never suffer, they're the ones who learn how to suffer in silence. And by the end of this story, you'll understand why Drew Brees didn't just play football for 20 years, he survived it. So stay with this story, because what happened behind the spotlight changed him forever, and almost no one saw it coming. And the truth is, the hardest battle of his career was never played in front of fans. After retirement, when stadium lights faded and statistics settled into history, Drew Brees remained one of the most respected quarterbacks the NFL had ever seen. But what the public remembered as stability was, for him, a life built on constant pressure. And the strange part was, the more successful he became, the less safe he felt. Because from early on, Drew learned something that never left him: nothing lasts unless you keep proving you deserve it. And that belief followed him long before the NFL ever called his name. As a child, his life didn't collapse loudly. There were no dramatic headlines, no public tragedies. Just a quiet change when his parents separated, a moment that taught him something too early: stability could disappear without warning. And from that point on, Drew stopped expecting comfort. He learned to handle things alone. And that silence became strength on the outside, but pressure on the inside. Because when a child learns not to show weakness, he also learns to carry pain without asking for help. And years later, that same habit would make him one of the toughest players in football, and one of the most exhausted. What few people realized was that Drew didn't grow up chasing greatness. He grew up trying not to be left behind. And that fear never fully disappeared. Even when he started winning. Even when records came. Even when the world began calling him elite. Because every success only created a new question in his mind. Was it enough to last? And that question followed him into football, where his body immediately became the first obstacle. Too short. Too small. Not the prototype. Those words weren't shouted at him. They were whispered in scouting reports, in hesitant praise, in compliments that always ended with doubt. And over time, that doubt became fuel. If his body wasn't enough, he would outwork everyone. Longer training. More preparation. Endless film study. Not to become great, but to make himself impossible to ignore. And that mindset worked. But it also came with a price. Because when perfection becomes survival, rest starts to feel dangerous. And Drew stopped allowing himself to slow down. Even after big wins. Even after proving people wrong. Because deep down, he believed one bad moment could erase everything. And in the NFL, sometimes it could. Draft day confirmed what he already feared. He wasn't the chosen one. He was the compromise. A second-round pick meant opportunity, but not security. And from his first day in the league, Drew felt it clearly: every practice was an audition. Every mistake felt permanent. And every game carried the silent threat of replacement. So he built two versions of himself. One for the public, calm, confident, controlled. And one inside, constantly preparing for the moment it could all end. And the terrifying part was, that moment eventually came. Not through failure. Not through losing. But through injury. A single hit that tore his shoulder and left doctors unsure if he would ever return to form. For the first time in his life, effort wasn't enough. Discipline couldn't fix it overnight. And suddenly, the identity he had built since childhood was hanging by a thread. Because if he couldn't throw, who was he? The league moved forward like it always does. Teams hesitated. Opportunities disappeared. And Drew faced the possibility every athlete fears: becoming replaceable. And that's when the real battle began. Not against defenders. But against doubt, pain, and the terrifying idea that everything he endured might end without meaning. And this is where most careers quietly fade away. But Drew Brees didn't disappear. He rebuilt himself slowly, painfully, without guarantees. Every throw during recovery felt uncertain. Every small improvement came with fear that it wouldn't last. And yet, he kept going. Because stopping meant confirming every doubt he had fought his entire life. When New Orleans finally gave him another chance, it wasn't seen as a safe decision. It was a gamble. A broken quarterback. A recovering shoulder. A city still healing from disaster. But sometimes, two broken stories meet at the right moment. And what followed would change both forever. Because the man who had spent years fearing he wasn't enough suddenly became the symbol of hope for an entire city. And yet, even as victories returned, the hidden cost never disappeared. The hits kept coming. The pain stayed. The pressure never fully left. And while fans saw leadership and confidence, Drew continued living that second life, the one where every season might be the last. The older he got, the harder it became to maintain the illusion of effortlessness. Recovery took longer. Pain lasted longer. But expectations never decreased. And that's the cruel paradox of greatness. The better you become, the less the world allows you to struggle. So Drew kept smiling. Kept leading. Kept delivering. Even when his body was quietly asking him to stop. Because for him, stepping away didn't feel like rest. It felt like surrender. And only near the end did the reality finally catch up, when the body that had endured for decades could no longer hide the damage. The throws slowed. The hits lingered. And for the first time, the ending became unavoidable. But here's the truth that makes this story different. Drew Brees didn't lose at the end. He survived long enough to choose when to walk away. And that was something his younger self never believed possible. Because the boy who once feared being abandoned left the game on his own terms. Still respected. Still standing. But carrying the invisible cost of everything it took to stay there. And maybe that's why his story resonates so deeply. Not because it's about perfection. But because it's about endurance. About the quiet battles people never see behind success. And the realization that sometimes, greatness isn't measured by how loudly someone wins, but by how much they carry without letting it show. And when the cheers finally faded, Drew Brees was no longer proving he belonged. For the first time in his life, he didn't have to. Because the man who spent 20 years afraid of being replaced had already secured something far stronger than records. He had become unforgettable. And the most surprising part? The world remembers the victories. But the real story was always about the pain he refused to let defeat him. And that's why, even after the final game ended, Drew Brees' toughest victory was the one no one ever saw.